The following journal was written March 3rd through March 4th, 2001. It took us about 3 weeks before we got back out to Mystery Cave. Our attitudes had changed a little bit since the first time we started the project. In the beginning, we looked at the whole thing as a huge, magical, mythical, fun adventure. Since the last trip out, we found ourselves taking a more serious approach. On the drive out this time, our conversation was a little bit more subdued than before. We hadn't talked much since the last trip, and mind you, this isn't for any other reason but scheduling conflicts. And instead of discussing ways of getting through the passages like we did before, we found ourselves talking about more rational explanations for what could have happened on our last trip. Neither of us had any ideas on what would have explained the unusual occurrences we experienced last time. But we were also both amused to find out that neither of us had talked much about the last trip to other people. This is a complete reversal from other trips. It had been fun to report to friends and family about our progress in previous times. It was always fun to tell people about that tight little squeeze we had to go through before getting into the passage. Most people have little desire to voluntarily subject themselves to incredibly tight places, and actually, neither do I. I don't like going through tight spaces, but getting to the other side has always been a good motivation. We left town early in the afternoon to beat the traffic. I don't really recall what time we actually got to the cave. Like I said, the mood was subdued. We got rigged up and started down. Obviously, B left a dog at home this time due to his erratic behavior the last time we went. We took essentially the same gear down as last time. We left some tools in the hole of the cave to save our time and our backs and the agony of hauling the extra weight. However, I would like to mention, even with the gear we got down in good time, we had a really good system for getting down and up and down and up. In fact, we've been down and up so many times it was almost like an exact science. However, even with that exact science, there was a mishap, a minor one. B scraped his arm on his descent. Not real bad, fortunately. He waited until we got all the way down the hole to actually patch it up. It was a superficial cut. While he was getting his wound cleaned up, I decided to get working on that mysterious hole. We both took note that the breeze was back and rumbling as loud as ever. We had 4 fresh batteries and 4 or maybe 3.5 fresh arms. I had high hopes that this would be the day. It started out pretty slow though. We first started working on the hole and the thickness around it was maybe about 3 inches, at least when we first started. As we have enlarged the hole's thickness has increased. As a result, our progress became slower and slower, as if there was some divine being telling us that, no, you're terrible people, don't do this. Still, we continued with as much energy as we could put into this work. The hole was big enough, at least, for me to put the hammer through the hole for reference, and you can see it on the image now. Then we put the camera into the hole, and we took a picture of Floyd's tomb. It was nice to see a pile of broken rock below the hole get bigger and bigger and bigger. We realized that we were going to have to put a certain amount of work in order to get through this, so we just got right down to business. We don't usually talk much while we work, since one of us is making a lot of noise with a drill and a hammer, and that can break your ear at times. But break times we use to chat momentarily about whatever topic comes to mind. The breaks take place whenever the guy working decides to switch roles. We both put in some pretty good work sessions. I have a little bit more stamina than B. However, his abilities come in when you realize that he has a much larger upper body strength than I do. Therefore, his times are shorter. We still celebrate the small victories we encounter along the way. Whenever a section we've been working on crumbles, we cheer. On a rare occasion that a flat-sized rock falls from the entrance, we whoop and we holler. It simply means that that's one small chunk of earth that no longer separates us from whatever else lies on the other side. I still harbor a fantasy about what's on that hidden entrance on the other side of the passage. And years ago, Spanish explorers hid their treasures in caves and sealed them up just like this. And it remained untouched until we find it. B has a more realistic depiction, although, and his is a bit more of a mundane theory. He figures that there's more cave on the other side. Well, we'll see who's right. Spanish explorers full of gold or cave? You know what? I like to go for gold, so I'll just continue on. This trip out, I wanted to see if we could speed up the work using our masonry bits. I purchased some good-sized ones at the hardware store at a good-sized price. One was larger in diameter than all the rest. The other was smaller round, but longer. I had pretty much concluded that the big one might be too big, and I was right. We tried to get it along and into the rock, but the progress was slow. We tried pushing it for all it was worth, and all we got was tired. The larger bit created too much friction in our area for our strength. It might have worked with a hammer drill, but we didn't have one. The longer bit worked fine with our drill, and we relied on it for most of the work we did on this trip. And I'd like to emphasize the point real quick here, most of the work. I thought we were going to be out one bit and one drill and my hand when it broke off towards one end. At this point in time, I was pushing so hard on the drill with a few inches in the wall that it snapped. I nearly rammed the drill through the wall from pushing so hard. We were able to retrieve the bit and we kept using it, minus a couple of inches. It still worked great, however, it wasn't quite as effective. Only once in a great while did we resort to using hammer and chisel. Work was proceeding as normal, until about the time we were on our fourth battery. There I was, kneeling down and working on the drill slowly into the wall at the time. I had my earplugs in, my safety glasses on, and I was lost in my own thoughts. Suddenly, over the squeal of the drill wearing down the rock, I heard a strange noise. It was loud. I could hear over the noise of the drill, even though I had my earplugs in. At first, I thought it was just a drill doing a bit of its job on the cave. It would frequently complain by screeching and whining as we forced it into the wall. But this was different. It took me several full seconds to comprehend what was coming from inside the hole. Not one bit. I stopped drilling and I yanked my earplugs out just in time to hear the most terrible scream I had ever heard off and trail off an echo of the darkness of the cave. I stared wide-eyed at the hole for several moments. I didn't move, nor did I breathe. I turned to look at B. Moments earlier, he had been lying on a rope bag, catching a nap. Now he was standing upright, mouth open, and a look of concern on his face. I turned and I looked at the hole again, half expecting to see a demon face staring back at me. Nothing was different in Floyd's tomb. I fixed my gaze on the back of that squeeze, where the limits of my light reached. There was no motion, only darkness beyond the reaches of my light. In complete silence, I followed what I could hear. No motion, my heart pounding in my ears. Not another sound could be heard in the cave. Suddenly I heard a scraping noise behind me, and I straightened up. I knocked myself out by hitting my head on the overhang. It would just be moving to turn his light, but I was so wired that it nearly sent me to my grave. B spoke again, and I jumped, and he said, I gotta get some rocks, I'm gonna put them inside the hole, okay? He explained that whatever animal that had made that noise might be able to get through the hole. I immediately grabbed a few rocks and hoisted them through the opening. Using the handle on the sledgehammer, I slid the rocks as far back into the tunnel as they could reach, creating a wall between us and the other side. Since the squeeze is so small, it didn't take long. The entire time I was doing this, however, I was thinking about the noise. Certainly did not come from no animal. I didn't know if B thought it was, or what he really thought, or if he was just trying to convince himself. I didn't say anything to him about what I thought. From the time it happened to writing of this journal entry 2 days later, I have tried to come up with some possibilities for the source of that noise. To describe it, I would have to say it sounded like a cross between a man screaming in fear and a cougar screaming in pain. It sounded like it came from the hole about roughly 100 feet away. The horrific noise reverberated through the cave and through my ears. B estimated the scream lasted about 8 to 10 seconds. My best guess that it was 5 seconds. 3 seconds while I was drilling, and 1.5 seconds to drop the drill and to yank my earplugs out, and about another half second of sheer terror. It was difficult to tell how much time passes when you're listening to the solo from the depths of Hades. After I filled the back of the passage with rocks, we just sat there listening to silence. My breathing was a lot more rapid than usual. Neither of us spoke for some time. Finally, B suggested that we get back to work, but keep an eye out for any movement in the hole. We put light in the passage and we shined to the back of Floyd's tomb. It was only at this point we realized that the wind had stopped again, and the rumbling could no longer be heard. To say I was nervous would have been an understatement. I didn't say anything to B, nor him to me. Back to drilling, B took over work. Which, to me, that was fine. I did not want to be near that hole at that point in time. I wasn't exactly worn out, but I didn't mind being as far away from the hole as I possibly could. B would stop time to time to just sit and listen. I just sat watching him with my light on. I wasn't close to the entrance of the hole, but I still found myself looking behind me down the passage to the still water. Every time my light would cast an unusual shadow, my heart would jump. My imagination would run wild. Oddly, B seemed to be a little bit less concerned about the strange noises. After a short period of time, he seemed to be focusing entirely on getting through the passage. I was still listening to the sound of the drill. It was calming, to say the least. I heard nothing but the new familiar sound of carbide on stone. As I contemplated about the possible scenarios that might play out in the other side of the cave, I found myself strangely getting somewhat excited about getting through it again. It might have been fatigue taking its toll on its mind, or the thought of something valuable or something new being on the other side. I don't know. I don't care. It was interesting. My thoughts were broken out when B let out a yell, possibly a cuss word. He said that the drill battery was dying, but he hadn't quite broken off a large or relative section that he was working on. He sat the useless drill aside him, and he picked up the hammer and bullpen and started working on it again. He started wailing away at the hole and created by the bit. After nearly 10 minutes of hammering, he sat back against the rock, sweating nearly out of breath. The bullpen was still protruding from the head. I had been ready to exit the cave for quite a while now. He didn't pass the issue, and without speaking up to me, we both started gathering our gear and we started to take our leave out. Once again, we stashed some of the tools in the passage. I was the first to start forward to the top of the cave. Several times we had to stop and wait for B, not because he was moving slow, but because we were just more eager to get out. A few times I felt better in that night, stepping out into the chilly air. Hello, this is the author's note again. My journal talks about the rest of the evening, our dinner, our decision to get a motel and come back the next day, our lengthy discussion about the strange sounds and what we heard, another mediocre night's sleep. I cannot believe that we were so willing to get right back into the cave after hearing the scream. Part of the reason I went along with the idea was because B seemed so indifferent to try to get the possible dangers out of the way. Even if there was an animal, which I did not believe, of course, but I could offer no better explanation that wouldn't make me sound like a madman. Even if it was an animal, we weren't putting ourselves in harm's way. In retrospect, I still have difficulty understanding our thought process at the time. We were just too eager to discover this virgin cave passage. Even if there was an animal, perhaps it was just a small one. I now think it could be summed up in one word. Testosterone. Woohoo! February 13th. It's amazing what a couple of good meals and sleep can do for someone's attitude. Even though we still had the memories of the strange noise fresh in our minds, we relate in our fire of enthusiasm. The other side of the passage seemed so close. We were in this, and this would be the day. We knew that this would be the day. We got into the cave and we started to work our way down into the hole, getting back into the darkness, and the cave brought back memories of the night before. The sight of the circle of the rock illuminated by our headlamps, the smell of dirt in the air, the sound we made as we crawled across the rock. We reached the entrance of Floyd's tomb. However, we were once again ready to blaze a trail leading to an undiscovered part of the cave. We immediately noted the presence of the breeze blowing out of the hole and a rumbling. The bullpen striking out and into its hole was an obvious sign where we needed to begin our work today. B took over where he left off the day before. I took up residence at the same spot that I occupied the night before, even though I was already well rested and wanting to start work. B was making the hammer sling with each blow. After a mere 2 or 3 minutes, he let out a cheer and turned to reveal a handful of rock that used to be attached to the cave. He was breathing heavily and a big smile on his face. So did I. For the time, the strange noise had been forgotten and the vision of success had captured our attention. The lower left hand of the hole had begun giving us grief because of the thickness of the wall at that point. We had felt that if we could just remove that corner that we might be on our way inside. B now held in hand the crumbled remains of the corner. Our excitement consumed us as we examined the hole. I took the hammer and pounded away at the surface of the hole. The idea was to remove the jagged edges that would take their toll on my skin. The size looked right. Now was the moment I've been waiting for. I cautiously approached the entrance to Floyd's tomb. I decided the best way to enter the hole was to place one arm over my head, turn sideways, and slowly work my way in. I seemed determined that this was not going to work. The hole was small, and I mean really, really small. If I was going to make it in without widening the hole anymore, I was going to have to put both arms over my head in a diving position. I turned my head sideways to slip into the tomb. The width of the entrance was the limiting factor. The height was sufficient. The arms overhead position flared my shoulder blades out. But there was still one room to get in. Plus, the arms overhead gave me the best squeeze side to side. In order to enter straight into the hole, I stood on my feet and bent over to be level with the entrance. My knees were bent and the position was uncomfortable. Sort of a semi-squatting position, bent at the waist, arms overhead. Plus, I had to slightly turn my upper torso to the left, counterclockwise, in a counterclockwise rotation, to negotiate or navigate the angle of the entrance. Notice the last photo that you'll see. It generally slopes up. I got my arms through the entrance with minor scrapes. Next came my head. By keeping it turned sideways, I was able to get it in, for the most part, up to my shoulders. When I got to my shoulders, I could feel the rocks touching all around my shoulders and chest, but that was not going to stop me. It definitely was scraping the surface of my body. I decided just to push through it, and keeping that in mind, I would have to come back out eventually. The pain was not too bad, and I was in! Well, my upper body was in. At least I could get a good idea of what was the inside of the tomb and what it was going to be like. Once inside the tomb, I had a few inches all around me in which I could position my body. It was the largest part of the passage, and conveniently located right at the beginning of the crawl. That gave me a little bit of room to get a little positioned and crawl further into the passage. Inside of the tomb, it gave me a whole new outlook on what it was going to be like to crawl through. Even though this is the largest part of the crawl, it was still definitely small. I could move my head around freely. in every direction, but if I turned around in any direction at all, I would be staring at a wall of solid rock. When I spoke to B, my voice sounded muffled, like I was talking in a small box. I could rest my chest on the passage floor, but the rocks were uncomfortable to say the least. I turned my head to look further ahead, but I couldn't see past the wall of rocks I had built the day before. The squeeze towards the end of the passage was now closer, and it even appeared narrower. I didn't even know if I could squeeze through or not. I knew it would be close, and I wanted to crawl further inside the passage. First, however, I had to work to get some of those loose rocks that were laying on the passage floor of my way. I was disappointed to find out that the rocks that looked loose were actually attached to the floor. I was hoping to be able to just scrape them out of my way, and I don't know. I put the sledgehammer into the passage before me, so at that point, I used it to push the rock wall, quote-unquote, we had made further back. I then dragged the sledgehammer back and forth across the floor to make any loose rocks break up, but the solid ones, they were kind of still stuck there. By sliding the head of the hammer under the squeeze, I determined that the narrowest part of the squeeze was about 7 inches high. We figured that we would have to do some work before I could slip through that. The entire time I had my head in the passage, B was just kicking back and listening to my descriptions and progress reports. Quick author's note here, at some point he snapped the photo shown above. Thanks, B, if you're listening to this, which I think you are. Up to this point, the size of the passage had not been too big of a deal. It was an incredibly small passage, but only my upper body was in. And since it was the largest part of the passage, my arms could move freely. I was pretty calm. Then it was time for the push. I slid the sledgehammer in as far as I could possibly reach since my body filled the entrance. I could not slip out or slip the tool out, and it was easier to push ahead in this manner. In order to rotate my hips to get a proper angle to enter the hole, I had to lean my entire upper body on my forearms. Then use my feet to climb the wall on the outside of the hole, and slowly crawl, quote-unquote, into the hole. My hips barely fit. Once cleared of the entrance, I could relax a bit and get into a position to work towards the squeeze. I decided to try the one-arm forward technique to get through. The passage was so narrow that whatever position I started out would whatever position I stayed with would have to, stay in that thing the entire length. There was no room to move around or change positions. I would have to turn my head one way or another and keep it in the same position. This crawl, in other words, was one of the tightest crawls I've ever been in. Moving forward at this part of the passage was relatively easy. I could move my arm, my left arm, to pull, my other arm, and push. At the same time, I would wiggle my body, trying to arch as much as I could to keep my chest off the rocks. I tried both ways and determined I would turn my head to the right. It felt the most comfortable. I began to lean against things as I went. I determined that a small flashlight in one hand would be nice. Then I could shine it ahead to get a better idea of what I was, going to be crawling through to get this over with. This was a difficult maneuver because I had to look overhead, and since my head was turned, it became immediately obvious that we're going to have to do more removing of rocks for the passage floor. I moved along the surface. I was constantly scraping my chest against rocks, and my stamina was slowly dying out. They were sharp, and it got increasingly painful, like some sort of masochist's wet dream. Occasionally, I would cause a rock slide along under my chest, and that would actually wedge me between the top and the bottom of the passage. I would have to go back up either way and try to move the rock with my cheek by using a sweeping motion with my hand or getting out of the way to move forward, or something along those lines. It's really hard to explain how this actually works. My little trip into the passage represented a major milestone in my caving career. When I begun caving, I did not feel overly comfortable getting through tight spaces. Even the little squeeze at the beginning of the cave was an obstacle to be overcome. But by pushing myself and forcing myself to try these narrow passages, I became much more calmer about these tight spaces. Still, this passage represented a new benchmark in small spaces. I had not been faced with anything this small before. I didn't remember having to take off my helmet before now. With this passage, it was mandatory that you took it off. As I mentioned before, not only do I have to take off my helmet, but I had to turn my head to the side in order to fit. The journey of the tomb went a little something like this. After I twisted my hips to get into the passage, I took a few minutes to stop and work out a simple game plan. Most of the length of my legs were still outside the entrance, and they were just dangling in the air. The tomb was not big enough to move my head around very much. And even move my arms freely into position was a task that was a little more difficult than I would have liked it to. It was larger than the rest of the passages, but not by much. It was sticking your head into a box. Everywhere I looked were rocks, and not far from my head, there were even, well, guess what? More rocks. Any sound I made was muffled and, I quote, and this is a quote from B, dead. The narrowest part of the passage was about 10 feet in. At this point, I was about 3.5 feet in. At the 4-foot mark, I would have to commit to whatever position I felt comfortable in and stay that way until the 12-foot mark, at which point the cave started opening up. I went with my left arm forward and turned my head to the right. B had given me the flashlight that I had in my left hand, and as I inched forward, I would try to brush those loose rocks out of the way of my arm that was to the left. This was somewhat successful, but there were still a lot of rocks that I missed or simply could not move given my current position. As mentioned, the first little bit of the crawl moved along was fairly quickly since there was little room above me to negotiate the passage. Then the walls started to close in around me. I had a few extra inches on either side of me, but with that being said, I could not move. But the top of the crawl was getting very low. At about the 7-foot mark, I could feel the top rubbing against my back as I would arch. After about another half foot, I couldn't arch anymore. I just had to push ahead with my toes very loose. In fact, in the image you see before you, you can actually see me at this point in our trip. After about another half foot, I could not arch anymore. I had to just push ahead. I decided that it would be a good time to see if I could back out. I tried it, and it was pretty easy, and that gave me a lot more confidence that I could still go ahead. I had B tie my wobbling feet just in case if he had to pull me out. My neck was starting to get sore from being cranked into the side. My head was getting heavy, but to rest it was my only option I had, and if I were to rest it, it would be laying on broken rocks, which is not quite as bad as broken glass, mind you, but it's still pretty painful. But even with this pain, I did it frequently. Oh yes, I was staring at the wall to my right. It was a mere 4 to 5 inches away from my face. Most of the time, I wasn't even watching the wall. Either my eyes were closed, which I sometimes do when I get to a tough or tight spot, or the light wasn't shining in that direction to give me a good idea or allow me to really see what I was looking at. It was very quiet in the tomb. Other than my own breath, I was breathing heavily from the effort it took to move. Thankfully, the breeze at the present was enough to cool me off. By lifting my head and carefully touching the ceiling from time to time, I could gauge the size of the passage that my body would soon pass. Though, much like a cat using its whiskers to gauge an opening in a fence, it did not quite work out so well. At the 7.5 foot mark, I could tell things were about to get real tight. I mean, if I thought scratching my face against rocks was worse before, wait until you hear about this. While lying in the darkness in a passage deep within the cave, one of the most unique positions to ponder, a mountain was literally resting on top of me, the entire earth lying below me. One tiny movement of the earth could cause One tiny movement of the earth and I would cease to exist. Or worse, to recognize the sheer fear shared by Mr. Floyd Collins as he lay there trapped for days within the heart of Mother Earth, incapable of freeing himself. I could literally become stuck just like Floyd, stuck in this earthly position. No one to help me. Just stuck. Picture yourself in my position, laying on your stomach, left arm extended over your head, your right arm at your side, having only a few inches in which to move. Your arms and hands are sore and bleeding from crawling and pulling yourself across broken rocks. Your entire body is resting on rocks, and your neck gets tired of holding your head up, so you gently rest your cheek on a lovely broken rock. Once you start again, you have to push your toes to scoot your body forward, sliding across more rocks. After moving a few inches, you're breathing hard and you have to rest. As you inhale, you can feel the back pressing against the top of the squeeze. It takes several minutes before you recover enough to press forward. The entire time you are laying, you're thinking about how you're going to get back out and what if you get stuck. Well, that's pretty much what I was going through at this point of passage. Quick author's note here. I decided that it would be a good time to throw in this photo of the squeeze. The photo was actually taken on a different trip, but it shows you how tight things were in this passage. Notice my head turned to the side. Not by choice, mind you. But it shows how tight things were in a passage. And you can see how I would have to rest my cheeks on rocks, and you can see how difficult it was to, well, look ahead of me. My arms were pinned to my side. I later determined that it would be the best position to pin my arms that way. To look ahead of me. My arms were pinned to my side, and that looked really, really bad. There was virtually no space between the top of the passage and my back. Tight, and yeah, not for the claustrophobically inclined. When I reached a point where my back was rubbing, I could feel the head of the passage getting no bigger. I knew I was most likely not going to get through. Still, I decided to give it one more push. If I had been in this position a year ago, I would have been in a state of panic. But not today. I was pumped. I was ready. I took a few minutes to rest, then I went for it. I exhaled completely, all the air in my lungs. This caused my chest to collapse enough to scoot forward a few inches. Because it took so much effort to scoot, I only went a few inches before I had to stop and breathe. As I inhaled, my chest pressed against the floor and my back was against the top. It took a little longer to get my breath back. Unbelievably, I did it again. Exhale, scoot, rest, again, only a few inches. Repeat, exhale, scoot. It took a few extra minutes to enjoy this position, pinned against a small passage. Wow, I cannot believe how relaxed I was doing this. I tried once more. Exhale, scoot. My back was rubbing too much to continue. Despite my failed effort, I was psyched. I took several long minutes to lay there and recover from the effort. B had been encouraging me the entire time. It was fun to hear him cheer as he saw my shoes go deeper and deeper into the hole. It was a nostalgic experience, don't get me wrong. Backing out to the rest was not too difficult, but it did take some work. I encountered some obstacles as I went in, and after I wiggled my hips out of the hole, which took some time, I had trouble getting my shoulders out. Both arms were overhead at this point. My shirt was getting caught on rocks, my shoulders were brushing against sharp rocks, and after struggling to find a good position, I gave up and I pulled my upper body out. And scrape! Oh my shirt pulled over my head, and I had some nice scrapes on my shoulders, which were just gnarly. But I didn't care. To me, this was a trip of success. I pushed myself beyond the point of what I thought possible. I kneeled at the entrance, and I took a look in that narrow passage I'd just been in. The rock wall that we had created was now at the 11-foot mark. I kneeled and I looked at that entrance. I had pushed forward my arm to the smallest point, which was at the 9-foot mark. We were now close. Between the work and the excitement, I was tired. I just sat there on the rope bag, grinning. What a trip. Another quick author's note here. The rest of the journal entry talks about the usual. Our climb out, dinner, trip home, our way home. We brainstormed. We came up with ideas for what could help us get through. We both invented some tools to remove the rock from the floor within the passage. We were both very excited by this trip. I, from pushing my limits in the cave, and B, from his success of climbing out of the cave. Oh, that crippled bastard. This was our first time he was able to climb all the way out without help of the climbing devices, nor my help. It was a personal success that showed that the progress he's made since his accident. And to me, pretty cool. I remain amazed that we could so easily forget the terrifying moment we just experienced the day before. All had been forgotten, with the strange noise being blamed in our minds on some rational, harmless explanation. The following was written down April 7th, 2001. Prior to going back out to Mystery Cave again, we spent a lot of time preparing. We made a squeeze box, which is a wooden box, the opening of which can be adjusted in size. We could then crawl through the opening and measure to see how tight of a squeeze it is and see if we can fit through. From that, we were able to determine that I need about 8 inches of height to get through the smallest portion of Floyd's tomb. That meant we would have to scrape out 1 inch from the floor of the passage. We learned that the best position we would need to get through the passage would be on my stomach with my arms out to my sides, and of course my head would be turned one way or the other. That position allowed my shoulder blades to drop to their lowest point in order to move to the farthest I can go. I would push forward or backward with my toes, and it sounded difficult but felt adequate. Later, it proved to work significantly. The second thing we did to prepare was to construct tools we invented to work with the cave. I climbed up a clever way to chip away the insides without having to climb inside. I had my neighbor weld together several lengths of steel pipe in a manner that would allow us to take it apart while we climbed down the tomb. We would still have the strength necessary to hold up to a blow from the hammer once it was together, and we made our own tips that we could screw into the pipe to reach the area we would need to work to. B came down with a cool design for a scraper using a angle iron, which he had his neighbor weld together. It proved to be a invaluable tool for scraping and removing rock. We were proud of ourselves of our own inventions. I felt like Einstein mixed with Darwin mixed with Jesus. I also had made a device to hold my drill that attached to our pipe. We ended up not using it since B's scraper device worked so well. I took an oath. I made a vow that we would not leave that cave until we've made it through the passage and we've conquered Floyd's tomb. This would be the trip. It had been a long time since we'd been out to Mystery, and we had been busy, though we had made tools and we had talked about it since. It was fun coming up with ideas for tools. Also, we made a squeeze box to determine the best technique for getting through the tight spot. Plus, we knew how much rock we needed to remove before we could even get through. We were excited to get back out to the cave and finish our project. Our climb down the passage took a little bit longer than usual since we had extra tools to carry. But once we got down to the passage, we immediately got down to work using B's scraping tool with the pipe I'd made. It worked like a charm. We could hammer the pipe on one end and the scraping tool on the other end drug the rock out. And we could push the debris out of the way of the passage and our way and out of our way. When we needed to measure our progress, we could turn the scraper sideways and observe the clearance. We worked for about 2 hours before we had a desire to try the tomb. Just wanted to make sure, and I was going to make it through on first try. B made one more sweep at the passage floor, clearing away any loose rocks, before I would end up crawling, and I would be pushing that wall we had made at the back of the squeeze. I had made preparation for my claw, and by fashioning duct tape suspenders to prevent my shirt from sliding around while we were sliding across. I went in with my flashlight in my hand, and even though my hand were at my side, I knew that I would need it once I got through As an expression of faith, I did not tie a rope to my feet. I was confident that I was going to make it, and finally, I made the attempt. Although I didn't mention my journal, I should mention, we did notice the breeze was back and the rumbling was present. Since we did not do any work to the entrance, I had to go through the same dance routine to even enter the passage. Once I got my upper body through the hole, I shined my flashlight ahead of me to work out that plan of attack that I keep on talking about. The passage didn't seem to be any bigger than the last time I was there, but most of the work had been done deeper into squeeze. I paused for a few minutes, then I twisted my hips to get my lower body in. I slowly inched forward as my entire body filled the passage. Before I was completely in, I got into position for the push. I dropped both my hands to my sides and I turned to the right. Then I begun to inch forward. Once my toes were inside the cave, I used them to push forward, to keep form, to keep my body from scraping and scrapping. I would walk, quote unquote, using my shoulders and my knees and my toes. Progress is slow, but steady, and that was fine by me. A foot or two before the tight spot, I could already tell that there was already a little bit more room. Even as I begun to touch the roof of the passage, with my back this time. However, I was able to continue moving forward. I reached the lowest point in the passage, and I could tell that it was going to be a tricky area to get through. Even with the work that we had done clearing out those loose rocks, I still felt sharp pebbles under my chest as I slid along. But my bodacious nips couldn't make it through. When I could feel my back brushing against the top of the passage in several places, I reverted to my technique of exhaling. Before I begun, however, I took a minute to lay there in the passage. I could see the glow of B's flashlight as the rays of light managed to squeeze past my body. I could feel a cold breeze evaporate the drops of dirty sweat on my forehead. I could feel 1,000 sharp edges dig into the surface of my skin. I felt a twinge of excitement like a masochist's wet dream as I realized the goal we had set out to achieve weeks ago, and we almost realized that this is what we've been working for. This thought alone made us want to keep moving. No matter how tight the passage became, I breathed in and out rapidly, and a few moments then began. Gotta scoot, stop to catch my breath, and repeat. After those few inches of scooting, I could raise my head off the floor of the squeeze, and I could tell that the passage was beginning to open up. I relayed this information to B, and we both took a few seconds to celebrate. During the rest of the slide through the passage, B was cheering me on. Virgin Passage, Neil Armstrong territory, final frontier, were phrases that we kept repeating, grinning ear to ear. We kept on going. Even though the passage was beginning to get larger, it was still slow going. I had to continue scooting along another foot and a half before I could slide my arms underneath me to get them to crawl. At that point, I felt my journey was essentially over. I was able to slip up slightly and move the rock wall we had erected several trips ago. Those rocks served as a somber reminder of what little caution we could use, and that would be wise. I shouted back to B that I was through. We both took a moment to congratulate ourselves on our success. B would likely never be able to squeeze through the passage and see what I was seeing, so I gave him a description of what the cave looked like. At this point, I only had my mini mag so that we could not see very far into the passage. The end of the passage made a gentle right turn and seemed to go for a ways. I was unable to do anything at this point but sit due to the size of the passage. All the broken rocks we had pushed through Floyd's tomb were all around me at this point, and there were no other signs of human intrusion. I had to wait until B passed me my helmet light to get a better feel of the cave. B used the pole that we made and that you can see, and he used it to slide it to me at the end of a rope. Then I was able to pull all my gear through the squeeze. The first thing that he sent me was my helmet and light. After I got the light fired up, I was able to see our new section of the cave. Our cave, I should mention. It was an exciting experience to see the result of hours of hard work over the course of several weeks. At this point, we still had no idea what the cave had to offer. The only thing that I could see was a passage that immediately followed a squeeze. It was a narrow passage with a low ceiling. I would easily be able to get through it, but I had to crawl. I'd begun taking pictures of it that I could show B. I asked B how far he thought I should venture into the new cave, in light of strange events that had occurred. For the first time, he too toned down his enthusiasm as he remembered those noises, and he slid the pipe through the tomb and loosened up the tip at the end. He said that I could use this as a weapon if I ran into an animal. Or he also made sure that I could hear. He also told me to make sure that we could hear each other as I progressed on in the cave. Even though we were thinking about the possibility of running into trouble, we never really considered the fact that if I did get in trouble, B would never be able to rescue me. And in fact, no one would be able to get to me for many hours. If I were in serious trouble, as in hurt, there'd be no way for anyone would be able to get me in time. But, symbolic of the whole experience, we were focused on a goal. No potential dangers that we were going to face. So far, we had dodged a proverbial bullet. So far. I strapped down my gloves and knee pads, and I grabbed my camera, and I begun to venture in. I crawled through the passage pictured above, which was about 20 feet long. At the end of the crawl, the cave bent slightly to the right. We would have to climb up a gentle slope, but then I was able to stand at the end of the next section of the cave. The next section was about 40 feet long. In addition to having a higher ceiling, the walls were a little wider into section 2. I just had to crawl through both sections. Both sections were relatively straight, and the floor was covered with rock, which crunched as I crawled, and then walked across it. The walls are basically the same as much as the mystery cave, except pristine. It was obvious that no one had been there for quite a while, and no one had been there before me. Upon closer examination of the walls, I found delicate types of formations. The first resembled a few chunks of granite cheese tied together at one end, with the rest of the cheese just flopping down. The second formation had been tiny strands of rock thinner than human hair. It looked pretty cool. I found several examples of both kinds of formations. I was not even through the second section of the cave. I could barely hear B. Cave passages were not very acoustically friendly. I shouted to him that I would go for a half hour, then I'd return. He said that would be fine and to be careful. I then proceeded to explore more and more. I could walk upright at this moment. I was on the third straight section of the cave when I discovered a crystal formation on the wall to my right. It was several layers in the wall resembling a clear candle wax, and was allowed to melt and drip down the wall. There were several small stalactite-looking formations formed by these crystals. The longest was about 4 inches in length. There would have had to been one that was much longer, judging by the size of the base, but had broken off. I looked to see if I could locate where it had ended up, but I couldn't find it. Passages continued on for about another 100 feet or so, and then the cave opened up even a little more. It was at the end of this short straight segment of the cave. At the very end of the segment, the cave made a bend to the left and opened up into a room. Just at that point where the room had begun, there was a large round rock that appeared to be leaning against a wall. This seemed to be odd, but singular in formations like this, because they're common. Formations like this were common. Magical. But by no means unique. I had crawled and stepped over several large chunks of rock, and then I fell down. Several large chunks of rocks that had fallen down from the ceiling, but this one was more round than the others. Once past the rock, the room opened up a little bit, about a height of 15 feet. It was about 15 feet in width and 30 feet in length. At the far end of the room, there was another passage leading straight out. As I entered the room, I had an eerie feeling. It was like an old saying, like I felt like I was being watched. However, once again, excitement of this new find faded. and the memories of the mysterious side of the cave crept back into mind. Suddenly I felt very, very alone. Fortunately for my ego, I was nearly out of time, and I had to get back to B before my half hour was up. I took several pictures of the room. I was going to get a feel now for how long the next passage was. Something caught my attention. On the left side of the room, on the wall, at about eye level, I discovered what appeared to be hieroglyphics. It was a single drawing that appeared to be just to be a part of the rock coloration. It looked like a very crude representation of people standing below a symbol. What the fuck? Oh my god, I was bummed. This meant that there had to be another entrance to the cave. Even if the entrance was closed or blocked, it might be an opportunity to open it and get B into the cave. I took another look at the drawing to make sure that I could describe it to B. But then I discovered some more pictures, and then I headed back to B. When I got back to the squeeze, I could barely talk fast enough to let B know everything I had just discovered. He was excited to hear about the newly found treasures, and we debated what our next move would be. I begun to send my gear back through the, tomb to B. I told him that it would be best if we got someone else to come back with me, in case something happened. He agreed, and I got all my gear, though I was faced with the wonderful task of having to negotiate Floyd's tomb again. Theoretically, a person should be able to get out of the passage if he just crawled through, simply reversing what he did. If he contorts his body in a certain way to get in, then he should be able to get in the same position he got out. In practice, this may not be proven to be possible or practical. Such was the case with Floyd's tomb. I determined in advance that I would attempt to go back in head first through the squeeze. I then knew that I could definitely make it by going feet first, but that would mean backing up all the way through Floyd's tomb. That would take a long time and be very exhausting. My only concern was that going in head first when I got to the end of the squeeze, would I have to get through the hole that we had made without the benefit of being able to twist my body? Oh well, I choose to go in head first and first deal with the exit when I got to it. I started into the squeeze very close to the tight spot. I would at least have it over with soon. It then turned out to be tricky getting through. I had to shift my hips to the right a little to get through, but just as I kept plugging away at it, my hands were once again by my side. My head was turned to the right, scooting with my toes. And once again, I was using my head to gauge and to tell when I would be in a tight spot. When I passed it, it would be a magical experience. I seemed to get tired a little quicker this way out. Must have been from all the work I had to do to get through and all the work I had to do just getting there. I was a little over halfway through when something bizarre happened. I was laying there taking a brief break when I heard the sound within the deep cave. It was faint but distinct, the sound of rock sliding on rock. My blood froze in its veins. I couldn't move. I could just lay there, straining to hear it again. Nothing. I began to scoot towards the exit. I didn't mention the sound to B, but I did recall one of our earlier trips when B said he heard the same damn thing. The task was getting out of our hole, and that would be as painful as I thought it would be. I put my arms overhead and forced my shoulders through the hole. I definitely left some skin behind. As I slipped through, B helped me as I wiggled my upper body through the passage, and then I could catch myself and ease my lower body out of the tomb. And I was out! B and I shook our hands together, and then we lowered up the gear, and we begun listening to any sounds that would be coming from the hole. But we were making too much noise gathering our stuff, so I couldn't really hear anything. As much as I look forward to getting into that passage again, it was a relief to be back out. It was pretty much how I felt about caves in general. I loved going in them, but I love it even more when I'm out of them. Something strange had happened with the pictures. I took a few in the new part of the cave, and the pictures I looked in the leading up to the cave turned out fine. Strangely, none of the pictures I've taken in the room turned out. Pictures around the rock were more importantly pictures of the hieroglyphs I saw. Pictures that had been taken before the room turned out great, but the negatives of the photos taken in the room were clear. Nothing. I remember what the hieroglyphs looked like, and I drew a picture to give you an idea of what I saw, but when I tried processing them, they seemed to come out rather strangely, and didn't come out quite right.